it's very unlikely that I'll say that you have a 0 chance. If we all agree that it's worth a try, working together towards achieving this goal of one healthy baby, we can't tell whether they're going to get pregnant. So if they're 42 and someone's pushed them out of the clinic and said, you're too old for this, they're missing the point.
I've got Dr. Paul Magarelli with me today, an IVF doctor from Colorado, who's a teacher at Yosan University, integrative pioneer of blending Western medicine, fertility with acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and just such a gem in our little hub here in Los Angeles. I can't thank you enough for joining me today.
It is absolutely my pleasure, Danica. Thank you.
You know, before we started rolling, you sprung this interesting piece of history at me that I really want to start with. It's different from how I had planned.
Okay.
Where you shared, just for the listeners, this perspective. I think we all take IVF for granted almost now because it's there's been so many advances and we really understand what makes it work and how to do it. But you just shared this washing of the uterus protocol to retrieve the eggs. Can you please set the stage for this interview where we show how far we've come with talking about that?
And that's the benefit of interviewing an older doctor. I have a lot of time to reflect on. So when I started at UCLA, part of the history of the IVF process was at UCLA Harbor. I actually hired one of the nurses who helped originate this process. They would wash the uterus during the time when they would suspect an egg would arrive. And then they would wash the uterus, take that fluid, find the egg, and that is what would be fertilized.
And so I'm imagining saline solution?
Yeah, saline. It would have to be a balanced saline solution, sure. The pH has to be right, but and that's how Edwards and Steptoe did it originally, is they washed the uterus, found the egg.
But those eggs are so small.
Yeah.
It'd be like a tiny drop within the saline solution.
And fortunately today it's easier because we take a smaller lake of fluid relative to the egg. They were taking an ocean of fluid relative to the egg. And so it was the evolution of vaginal probe ultrasounds, because the middle stage between, it may have been concurrent, was we used to do laparoscopically. We would go place a little telescope through the belly button and have a manipulator or a syringe, a needle and a syringe, and we would aspirate the follicles.
From what you could see with the eye without ultrasound. So it would be like where the ovary had a little bump?
Yep, exactly. Take the fluid, get the egg, and then of course, doing it through the vagina, it just changed our world from an efficiency standpoint and a safety standpoint and number standpoint. And as you know, IVF is really a numbers game. So the more eggs you can get safely and the more mature eggs you can get safely, the better your outcome. Yeah. Right. So it was just, at the time, of course, you don't pay attention to it. That's the evolution of it. But if you look back, there are a lot of people who don't know about the history or the fact that I think it was 200 or 150 attempts by Edwards and Steptoe to get that one pregnancy. So the pregnancy rate was 0.001% or something like that, or 0.01%. So when we talk today about, my clinic has 70% and this clinic has 60%, pregnancy rates, not just getting eggs, but pregnancy and even delivery rates on the 40 and 50%, it seems low when you're the patient, but as a scientist physician who's been at this forever and have done research, it's amazing what we do.
Mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing.
Yeah. When Dr. Mars said that the first transfer that resulted in a live birth was the 5th transfer that they had done at USC, and I don't know if I'm getting the data wrong, but that right there showed just another one of those early advances and catapulting.
Because his was frozen eggs. That was his big frozen embryos.
Frozen embryo.
Yeah, that was his big claim to fame, for all of us.
Yeah, that catapulted the science.
It's changed everything. Yeah.
Right. And then we talked, he and I, about the ovarian stimulation protocols and Clomid and Follistim, Gonal
Yes,
all of those.
Pergonal, the original.
Pergonal
Yeah.
days. Yeah. So a lot of the listeners might appreciate this history so that they can appreciate that they get to do IVF instead of
Yeah.
feeling down that they have to do it.
Unfortunately, the biggest, I think, impediment to patients coming to see us is the belief that sort of the buck stops here, that if you can't get past us to a baby, then it's fruitless, hopeless. And we can talk later on about that a little bit in my experience with acupuncture. But if there was one thing I could do, it's to say, this is all a process. You never know. Many folks will do IVF, fail, and then the next month get pregnant on their own. So I would hope they just see it as an efficiency tool. Can I get there quicker, easier, more safely, especially from a genetic standpoint with PGT? But it's the accessibility that makes it so hard for folks. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so expensive. So therefore, this has to work. And then we'll talk about your research where the mindfulness set changes or attempts to put it in perspective about life and the world. And so anyway.
Right. When I'm talking to them about having to do IVF, I insert this important piece of information that we're going to get a lot of diagnostics too, and maybe some answers. Because one thing we are all concerned about is how to elevate the chance of success, right? So the more that we can calm them with information, the more that we can calm their nerves anyway, acupuncture, herbs, explanations, friendship, that kind of thing does increase the chance of success often.
It does. And the hardest part for all of us, especially in the Western mindset, if it's not a randomized controlled, double-blinded, 0.05 or 0.01 statistical p-value, somehow it doesn't have value. But again, as we get into the story of acupuncture and how I got introduced to it, we can kind of talk about what led me down the pathway to maybe we don't know. So therefore, if we don't know, let's just play. Let's just play.
Right. Thank you for that. And thank you for having the open mind. And thank you, if Diane's listening, your acupuncturist wife, for like every day getting your mind more open back in the day.
Thank you.
Well, so do we start with the ABORM?
Sure.
Or do we start
we can start before that,
yes,
because
exactly.
You're talking about my journey into this field. Well, first and foremost, this is my second career that I stumbled upon into. I always wanted to be a marine biologist. I always wanted to work with Jacques Cousteau. That was my dream. And I was a kid who grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey, right out of Manhattan. So, it was kind of seemed unrealistic at the time. But I ended up working with his son, Jean-Michel Cousteau, and I ended up in New Guinea on an expedition with him. So it turns out your dreams can come true, even if you don't know how you got there, but I did. So my career was around marine animal reproduction. So I was a scientist. I never wanted to be. I was never one of those pre-med students that I wanted to be a physician more than anything. No, I didn't have that as my DNA. It was, I love science. I love the ocean. And it turns out I fell into reproduction and I absolutely adored it. And it was fascinating. It was so multifaceted. And then things happen. Again, that's what the life part of life is. And because of circumstances, I was so good at writing grants that I ended up the scientist on a desk and never out in the field because I was writing grants and getting $1 million grants and had other PhDs doing stuff. And I lost my soul in that, and it really wasn't what I wanted. And there was a time when I thought maybe I could be a physician, but the physician was in reproduction. So I ended up just shifting, going right back to school as a medical student after almost a decade as a scientist with a PhD and old and much younger, people I'm with. And did my training at the University of Arizona. Then I went to Duke University for my OBGYN, which is a fascinating place, but very emotionally and difficult place to work. But then I ended up at UCLA for my reproductive medicine fellowship, and all of a sudden all the juices came back. So, long story short, I went through academic medicine. I went through multi-doctor practice. And then I started my own practice in 1999 in Colorado and just began growing there. And it was a great time. People were making all kinds of money on the stock market, crazy time, unrealistic because it crashed inevitably. But and a crazy acupuncturist named Diane Credenda came to my office. I was probably there about 6 months, almost a year. And she said she made an appointment, very formal. She's, made an appointment, and I had this big desk, and I was behind the desk, and she was in front of the desk, and she was holding a paper. And she said, I think acupuncture will help your patients. And of course, if you know anything about Duke and UCLA, very straight-laced places, and I was like, as long as they pay you in chickens, then I'll let them see you. But otherwise, show me the data.
Was she holding the Paulus study?
Yes, she was holding the Paulus study, and her hands were shaking. And,
the REs back then it was very intimidating, and we were on two separate sides of the desk.
Yeah.
It was like it was very intimidating, but I'm glad that we all kept on talking.
And so that's the beginning of my journey, because I said, I'll be happy to read anything you give me. And she gave me the Paulus and then Steno Victoria. And then, any papers that she found or saw. And she was very tenacious about doing it. And I ended up in a position, and this is where we started a conversation, where I had 5 patients where I had done everything possible that I could think of in Western medicine, and they were not getting pregnant. Actually, the first 5 were just constantly miscarrying. And so I said, I met this crazy acupuncturist, and I said, and I've done enough reading now that I believe nothing could hurt or harm the patient. That was my biggest concern, because at that time they were spending $25,000-$30,000 at that time, which is 1999, which is probably equivalent to $50,000 now to get a baby, to get a try. And their chance for success was 15 to 18%. So again, a whole different world. Day 3 transfers, fresh transfers.
And that Paulus study was saying IVF has like a 17 to 25% chance of success. And once you added acupuncture at the time of the transfer, then it would create a 42%.
It was about a 15% improvement.
Yeah.
And it was consistent. And again, no harm I could find in the literature in terms of how it would impact the medications I was using, the hormonal profiles. Granted, we found out later it actually did, in a positive way, affect the hormonal profiles. So she took the 5 patients. 3 of them, she got pregnant on her own, never set them back. One of them actually got a second baby with her. And that started my journey into, there might be something here. There might be something here. Because honestly, we had enough going on in the field, in 1999 in terms of, we only had 1-2 protocols. We only had 1 medication. There were so many limitations, and it was such an expensive process and required a lot of people that we just, that's really where it all started.
Yeah, I remember. So that study came out in 2002, and I started my practice in 2001. So
Wow.
I had that study, and I was sending it to different local REs here in town, and trying to get in there to help, ideally to get their patients so I could work with them before starting in vitro, as the Paulus study talks about just 1 treatment at the time of the transfer and 1 after the embryo's been inserted. So there would be no pattern differentiation of the patient's case, no herbs. I thought that study was so interesting, but so powerful. And it was, like 200 plus patients.
It doesn't have to be a lot to make a difference. That's the thing. I mean, it was 5 patients that were intriguing enough to me to say, wow, 3 out of 5 of them are having babies, and I did everything I could to get them to a baby, and it's not working. Maybe there's something here. which led us down the path of doing very rigorous, unorthodox from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective research. And the unorthodox part was we did not do differentiation of syndromes, which is a classic component, as you well know, of course, of your medicine. And that literally required me to get a legal document from all the acupuncturists who were going to be part of this constellation of providers, because I, as a Western physician and as a scientist, wanted to publish if I was going to do this work. It was all self-funded. And I had to demand that rigor because I knew how I'm a reviewer for Fertility and Sterility and other journals. I knew what the reviewer was going to say if you had everybody doing everything differently and then trying to say acupuncture helped, then which is it just wouldn't work. Right. And so we got them to do it. And,
so this means that the acupuncturists were agreeing to follow a protocol that would be just specific points, and they wouldn't try to put a personalized spin on it.
Correct. And that was a big deal. Tough deal. Yeah. It was a tough deal at the time. And Diane actually combined the Paulus and the Standard Victorian protocols because she believed, and we now know that today, is two treatments is not going to, even if you had a physical ailment, 2 treatments is not going to cure it. It takes more, especially in the area as we understand about our physiology.
Yeah, those treatments at the time of the transfer can be helpful because we're bringing blood flow into the uterus, and that's important, and we're calming them in those moments. But as far as like treating a pattern that's resulting in recurrent miscarriage, that's expecting way too much of the acupuncture.
It is. And so that's how that started. And then you asked, I think, the question about ABORM, the American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine. Well, Ray Rubio,
an acupuncturist,
yes, here in LA, working at Yosan, actually, or I think it was at the time at Yosan, wanted to pull together the very few acupuncturists who were working with reproductive endocrinologists who may or may not have been published, but simply were out there making their voices heard, and had an idea of creating a subspecialty in the field of reproductive medicine, or as Oriental reproductive medicine, it was how it was termed then, and called up Diane, and Diane's like, why the heck is this guy calling me? She's a very humble person, even though she's like the grandmother or the godmother of combining Western and Eastern medicine. And I said, oh, yeah, because you've done something. Because she was one of the few published in the country, as in a U.S. I mean, there was a couple of Europeans, but there really wasn't any U.S.-based acupuncturist doing this. And she had been, and we had been doing we had been doing abstracts at the national meetings about the work we were doing. And so we got together, and since Ray had never started a fellowship, and I am a board certified person in a fellowship, he and I became advisor to the board well before the board wasn't even there. And we developed the curriculum and I remember giving the tests to all of the first board members, and I did the Western medicine side, and of course others did the traditional Chinese medicine side.
Yeah. So when that was coming out, it must have been 2007.
Gosh, I'm not good with dates, but yeah.
Yeah, because I had just had my first against the odds baby. And so I went to talk to Ray and said, should I do this ABORM thing you're doing? And he said, no, you already have your reputation. Don't worry about it. Take care of your little baby. And then I had another one. And that's when I started the seed program. And so then I went back to him a few years later and I said, hey, should I do this ABORM thing? And he said, no, you have the seed program. That's legitimate enough. We know you know your thing.
Right.
And he said this ABORM and the doctoral program was to try to standardize the amount of education that all of us have as a minimum to be able to practice with the reproductive physicians. And I loved the idea. And I went back and I am in the ABORM, and I got my doctoral, and I did all of that in 2018, 2020.
I know you were my student.
Right. Well, we'll talk about that, but I want to just say, like, those early days, figuring out how to standardize what we knew and what we should know.
A big part of it was creating safety in the minds of the reproductive endocrinologists that
Exactly.
you, the acupuncturist, would respect our medicine and be very consciously aware of how herbs interact with hormones, interact with the nervous system, so that we could feel assured that it wasn't going to be a takeaway.
Right.
Anything that diminished outcomes, both morally and medically and economically, is a big deal in our field, because we have to report our data publicly, which no other field of medicine really has to have that kind of focus, but we do.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then the doctoral program at Yosan, the DAOM program, that was just us in a closet in one of the rooms at Ray and I, and just hacking away at just what do we need to teach.
How can we torture the acupuncturists?
Right. How do we teach them? What do we need to teach them? What is the constellation of things that at least will get them, exactly like you said, a handle to have a cogent, good conversation with the reproductive endocrinologists, because it was their patients at that time. I think it's changed now, but it was their patients who would then be sending to an acupuncturist. Mm-hmm. Now I think there's an equitable relationship where it's bilateral. You send, we send, and it's very mutually beneficial. But at that time, it just wasn't like that. And we had a lot of arguments about that too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty heated at times.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can remember being in a hot tub in Vancouver, and we were having a crazy conversation, screaming at each other about.
Yeah, that was at the symposium.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I remember. Yeah. And all of us acupuncturists were like, who is this guy? And he's in charge of how we do things. But now, that would have been like 2016, that IFS.
You're good with dates. I'm not.
The timeline.
So it would be then, yeah.
Yeah. And I came back and I was like, dang it, I have to get that DAOM to legitimize what I've been doing. And because the rest of them are going to get on this boat and be practicing and be all interacting with one another. And I had started doing it in 2001.
Yeah.
So, but you know what? It's not been anything that I regret. I have learned and cemented and been supported by friendships. And I love being in
this community is amazing.
This
is a really amazing community.
Well, that's the basis for this podcast. And it's about this community where we're bridging and integrating, sharing ideas, and teaching our patients about how to empower themselves, about the process. And it really is the whole community. So speaking of the community, I want to bring us back onto the topic here. You have said when you teach us in class, the 0 or 100%. And there's that's statistical speaking. So if
this is the dance that we have with patients. Doctor, what's my chance of getting pregnant if I do X or Y or Z? And typically they're looking at a number from 0 to 100, and they want a percentage of that. And that sets up disappointment, or it maybe sets up glee. Like my friend said she has a 30% if she does IVF, and I only have a 15. Well, your friend is 20 and you're 60. I mean, just joking. But the point is, for each patient, for each situation, by the way, for all of life, it's 0, you're not pregnant, or 100% you are, regardless of what therapy, whether it's traditional Chinese medicine, whether it's Western medicine combination. Winning the lottery, it's either 0 or you did 100%. It's so why I say that is to get around, first and foremost, it's very unlikely that I'll say that you have a 0 chance, unless your tubes are tied and you don't want to do IVF, and then your chances are 0. That's 0. Or you don't have any sperm and you're still having intercourse, that's 0. Or you're in a situation where we simply can't stimulate the ovaries and we can't get eggs, so that's 0. Those are the hard conversations, but for most other people, it's a what's the opportunity for doing this treatment in terms of what is that opportunity going to do for me? Well, typically, all of the care we give shortens the time to pregnancy. Whether you get pregnant or not, of course, there's a lot that's in our hands, but there's a lot that isn't in our hands. But everything we look at is the addition of acupuncture to a Western medicine protocol, enhancing statistically for a population the chance of them getting pregnant. So if we now know after 20 years-ish of research in this field that about an average of 14% improvement in populations studied if you add acupuncture to a IVF protocol, that's what you can expect. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get 14% pregnant. It just means whatever your chances are will improve 14% in a population of people like you. Yours is still 0 or 100. And sometimes that gives a little light bulb and they go, oh, okay, so there's hope. And that's the reason I use that terminology is if we as colleagues believe, and I see my patients as clients really working together towards achieving this goal of one healthy baby, we're working towards it together. So if we all agree that it's worth a try, and you can ask me any questions like, what do you think that does? And how is it going to change? And I can give you those answers, and you can do the same for your patients when I add this therapy or this herb or that kind of thing. And if everybody agrees that it's worth a try, we can't tell. Even if that person's 20 years old, we can't tell whether they're going to get pregnant. It's going to be 0 or 100. So if they're 42 and someone's pushed them out of the clinic and said, you're too old for this, that's not, A, it's not true. And B, they're missing the point because it's 0 or 100.
And well, this is where you have said we've got the empowered individuals, the ones that are seeking out acupuncture, hypnotherapy, things like the SEED program, counseling, changing their diet, changing their mindset. All those things are the empowered individual versus the, quote, general population.
Well, that's what you bring. I mean, that's what you've brought in your own research and in your own spirit of how you're providing your care. And by the way, I just got a beautiful tour of your suite here. It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
It's a very nice feeling.
Thank you.
Very nice. I am curious. I can't answer this, but I can give you some insight. What is it about helping a person become more mindful, more empowered? Where is that mechanism for establishing for enhanced fertility? Like, where does that sit? Do you have some ideas? Because I'll challenge you, and then I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
Okay. When I teach my patients empowerment tools, it starts with some fertility education, but that's not me talking about LH and FSH.
Right.
It's me talking about two foundational concepts, fertile thoughts and fertile foods. So fertile thoughts would be mindset shifts, reframes, re-educating, thinking about the process differently, thinking outside the box. What can I do? What can I do?
Right.
And then
you're not a victim in this.
You are right.
You're not a victim
to become more empowered
Yeah.
in the agency of I'm not doing the meditations or I'm not changing my diet. The other part being the fertile foods. That's where these foods can support the hormones as they're in suppression state, do a little bit of a cleanse or stimulation phase with some good fats to support estrogen levels. And then post ovulation or post embryo transfer, we want to help support the progesterone levels and not create a lot of gas and bloating and spicy foods and things. So like things like squash, yam to support progesterone.
Sure.
And then in the week before the test, we give them different things like a fiber-rich trail mix, red fruits and things that are symbolic of a nice lining. And so those foods, they create this they create this like sense of, okay, this is what I'm doing on a on a primal level, I'm eating eggs to make eggs, or I'm having this red pomegranate juice
By the
because
way, that's why I ate some walnuts. It's
yes,
supposed to look
right,
like
the
a brain.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
So the way
Right.
that the foods look is really fascinating. And when we put them into the cycle. And so then it just makes sense. Again, it fills this void or a need for them to feel like they're somehow in control. So when they're in control, I think it affects the hypothalamic environment, and the pituitary sends a message down to the ovaries and the uterus of safety, which is why I think when we were in COVID, everybody was feeling like their survival was threatened, and it was tanking the estrogen and causing miscarriages, which that's really digressing and getting us ahead of the conversation.
Yeah.
But I think that when we are given things to do, we feel more in control. If we feel more in control, we feel less anxious. If we feel less anxious, we presumably feel more safe. And if we are more...
And to me, that's the piece. It's the adrenals
Yes,
that
the adrenal
I
gland.
think...
Yeah, less adrenaline.
Yes, and I think that there is a study, which for the life of me, I can't find. But there's a study which looked at the impact. There's many, many studies looking at the impact of stress on fertility, and it's never found. It's never been found, right? It's never been found. It's always understood, never been found. But this one person did the study and asked a different question. Is it the stress hormone in the blood, which we measure, or is it in the cerebral spinal fluid, which is where the hypothalamus pituitary is bathed in? When she looked at, and can you imagine getting people doing spinal taps for this? I can't imagine, but I love good patients. They're wonderful, but experimental patients. But dramatically, it showed that impact, that correlation. Is not the impact, the correlation. That to me is the way we can look at the mystery of what acupuncture does, or what the seed program does, or what mindfulness does, what yoga does, where we actually can't measure it because we're looking in the wrong place for the measurement. And that's just an evolution of science. That's why I love science, is you just keep asking more questions and you'll figure it out. But that to me, if I had another 100 years and a whole bunch of time, would be something that I would look more into, is looking at the cerebral spinal fluid and seeing changes there. Now, it'd be nice if we could do it somehow passively without having to stick needles in people's spines, but
maybe some kind of thermography measurement or something, because what got me on my journey was a diagnosis at age 31 in 2001 of diminished ovarian reserve, premature menopause. And so I had just graduated acupuncture school. I could have been presumably so healthy. The height
ready to go, make your family.
But the stress of opening a clinic here in Los Angeles threatened my survival. I need to make it work, right? Which meant I need to help these patients get pregnant so I can gain the respect of the MDs in the field, where they're kind of hostile to the acupuncturists and afraid we're going to do something that hurts their patients.
Sure.
That probably had a lot of adrenaline running in my system. And so the acupuncturists understand where the chakras are and all of that's all in the spinal column. So like you said, we all know it, but to measure it, right? Well, I went back to UCLA's journal library card catalog, and I found an article in the some journals like the 1800s when I was researching adrenaline and ovaries, and it was something like the recipe to heal inflamed ovaries was diet and quiet. And so they would give them lamb, fatty lamb.
Yes, lamb is a very
fatty lamb, and then put them into rooms with darkness and leave them alone. And so I was that makes so much sense, right?
That was the seed for your seed program.
Well, it was like, we have to do something that makes the women feel calm and safe again. And now here we have this very noisy world. And then we entered the COVID pandemic quarantine phase of life. And the outcomes tanked. The medicines didn't change. It was before any vaccines came on board. And our patients weren't infected with COVID at that time. But they were losing all of those normal pregnancies, and their egg counts were dropping, the whole thing. So it was like, Wow, impact of stress.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress, right? So you are really not just a patient advocate, but an acupuncture advocate, and you are working in conjunction with Kindbody. That's a business helping women to improve
It's a women's
awareness.
organization, and it really is a women's organization. It's of the 1,000 employees, I think 990 of them are women. So it's definitely a women's organization. They have 35 centers around the country. Their mantra is that comprehensive, non-clinical approach to the care of our patients, for infertility patients, as well as menopausal patients, as well as gynecologic patients. They want to be the whole woman, one-stop shop at some point. Their desire now, and this is what I'm working with right now, I was hired about a year and a half ago now, January of 2023, and I had 3 mandates. One is to create a program to train gynecologists to do reproductive medicine procedures, because we're simply not graduating enough reproductive endocrinologists. For every 40 we graduate, 40 reproductive endocrinologists retire. So, and we're growing astronomically with venture capital and people building centers all over the place. There's a paucity. So I've always liked training. And of course, with the doctoral program, it's all about training non-reproductive endocrinologists to understand about reproductive endocrinology. So this was just taking that and then the practical of the procedures. The second mandate that I chose to come back to work as I had retired was to combine in a big institution like Kindbody integrative medicine. So I wanted it to be the blend between ABORM graduates and the doctoral graduates. And we're actually launching in the next month a program where all of the ABORM members and all of the doctoral student graduates, as well as, mostly the graduates, will have the opportunity to be featured in all of our 35 centers. So there will be a way for the doctors to know who to refer to as sort of an upper level referral. And then the patients will see sort of a validation. Oh yeah, it's okay to do that. So that this is a timely interview because it's actually, they're meeting tomorrow, ABORM. And we've already talked to Dr. Hoffman at Yosan. So that's coming down the pike. And then my third one, which has been my desire forever, is high quality, affordable fertility care. How do we make it accessible? Now, Kindbody is unique because they have focused on what's called enterprise. So they won the contract, or created the contract and won it, for Walmart. So now 1 million employees have access to IVF all over the country, even in places where there's no reproductive endocrinology program. We will fly them to get their care, and that's part of their insurance. We have like Virgin Atlantic. We've got all these major players, Rivian, all these players that we approach and say, we think you want to do this for the women for the couples in your organization. Because remember, our world has changed dramatically now with, gay marriage being legalized. By definition, they're infertile, right? Mm-hmm. So it can't be anymore a disease. It never was, but it can't be anymore. It's a situation that's the healthcare system is designed to manage and take care of efficiently and effectively. So to allow podiatry in a health insurance company, but not infertility, how does that make sense? So Kindbody's approach is get these companies, since it's not mandated yet legislatively, although there's a lot of movement in that area with what happened in Alabama and other places. There's a lot of movement to say this is a right, this is something we should cover, this is what we do for the country. We are saying, well, let's get these big companies to take a subset and create a policy, like an add-on policy to all their regular policies, for us to provide those services. So that's, to me, is a way we can get access to care, and that access, and then that integration with the acupuncture community is I've been dedicated to the acupuncture community for almost 20 years because I have seen the results. I have done the research. I've worked with the professionals in it like yourself and others. I have understood in my own practice, which was a very large practice before I joined Kindbody, where those patients who had the interaction with an acupuncturist, their ability to manage the stress of the program, of the protocols and of the treatments, their ability to listen better. They actually listened better because they were less uptight. They had an avenue for them to be able to express to another provider. I'm really having trouble with Dr. Magarelli. He's bugging the crap out of me. And then that provider could say, well, he's not really bugging you. He's a straight shooter and he's telling you the facts, and they may not be in the way you want to hear them, but I'll say them in the way you want to hear them. But having those one-on-one relationships I've shown it, I've published it, I've presented it. It enhances their ability to get to a baby. It's either less expensive, meaning fewer treatments, it's shorter to get to that baby, and it's less stressful. And so it's still not a universal belief in my fellow reproductive endocrinologists. There's still, no, it's just, there's still a distance between it. But what I can tell you is, when I first started, there were only 2 programs in the United States that had acupuncture relationships. Now, every single IVF center in the country will either directly have a relationship with an acupuncturist, or indirectly by referral, or they'll actually hire them.
Somebody in-house.
In-house. So that in of itself. Now, again, are we going to quantify it? Are we going to prove it? Is it going to make a difference? Well, the first studies on Clomid, which is the drug of choice for gynecologists to treat infertility patients, was 7 patients. That's it in the 30s and 40s when they began to do this work. We don't have good data in medicine. We have the art of medicine.
Right. And reproductive medicine research is messy.
Yes, it is. And
because
by
how
definition,
many eggs and all the different variables and the different things that will change each protocol.
And it's the only area of medicine where we're not allowed to test. What's the best test? Get one man, try to impregnate 10 women, right? Mm-hmm. That would be a good study. Mm-hmm. But think about the morality of that, right? Because now you're getting a standard. To dissect the embryo, that's
can't do that.
You can't do that.
Right.
To get 10 embryos from one woman and put them in 10 different women to see, we kind of do that now, but that's gestational carriers. But the point is, the kinds of studies that would need to be done to be definitive are ethically and morally very impossible for us to do. So we're not at a disadvantage, but we have to recognize that lack of randomized controlled trial testing means we have to take whatever we know about 1,000 fields and apply it to our medicine. And adding acupuncture as a sister, profession to what we do is as much sense as understanding how some kidney hormones might affect, the ovary, like cortisol and that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so fascinating. I think it's just so amazing what Kindbody is doing, increasing awareness also for like egg freezing.
Oh my gosh.
That conversation, I think, is that how Kindbody kind of came on?
That was how they started. And believe it or not, they had a mobile unit going out to communities for women so they could get their AMH tested. I mean, literally a gynecologic suite on wheels. Mm-hmm. And they could get these blood tests and exams and things like that. They still have it. They don't use it as much. But yeah, they're out there promoting. But I as much as I'm a member of that organization, I just think our field is amazing in terms of what it's willing to do and trying to do, and the advancements in terms of understanding poor implantation. The genetics have exploded in our field now. The ability to to take cells from an embryo, a small little bit of the placenta cell, and help predict which embryos would have, at least a 5-fold improved outcome. And here's the real kicker. That is pushing us to the point where we can begin to think about eliminating passing on genetic diseases in fertile populations. Once we jump from the fact that intercourse can be fun and it's great, but procreation should be in a lab so that we can reduce these diseases, which create havoc in families and societies from both financially and emotionally. That tool is such an enormous benefit to society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not denigrating that in some fashion that a child is not worth it because they have a genetic illness. That's not it. But as any parent will know, if you can prevent a life mm-hmm. where they're challenged constantly and they can have a more robust opportunity to express every aspect of their DNA, I think that's where we should go.
Yeah. Well, I think it is where the evolution is taking us.
Yeah, I think so too.
We just got to keep surrendering to it every day, wondering, okay, where are we going today? And how to not fight it too much or fight the fights that really matter.
Knowledge
to fight.
Can't hurt.
Yeah.
How you apply it should be regulated, should be thought about. We should have a national philosopher, you know what I'm saying? But stopping people from learning in science or in the application of science as medicine, that never makes sense to me. And that's part of my curiosity with acupuncture and Chinese medicine and herbs and everything else is that's where it kept me going. And it's a fascinating field. I mean, it's a medicine that's thousands of years older than my medicine, for mm-hmm. sure. And it's a field that looks at the whole person.
And we can subspecialize too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the cool thing.
Yeah.
My interest is these long-standing COVID, how to work on helping the patients that have had those poor outcomes, how to come back online with their egg counts mm-hmm. and how to prevent those losses from happening.
And you're getting some success in this area?
Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
So we can talk off of that, but I'll just tell you very quickly, I'm helping with more like blood flow and preventing microclotting and working on calming the inflammation in the immune system.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. Inflammation is
that'll affect
real.
Implantation, births,
mm-hmm.
everything.
That's what I find so fascinating now.
I love it.
Yeah. Kind of controversial to talk about for a while, but I think less so now,
I
more
agree.
and more.
I agree.
We're more in the, okay, that happened, now what do we do? Right?
Yeah.
And thinking outside the box,
mm-hmm.
that's something that you and I have talked a lot about.
Yeah. That goes back to all knowledge is good knowledge. You don't apply all knowledge, like the atom bomb, right? I mean, there's knowledge. But we also have nuclear reactors and we have nuclear submarines. We have nuclear, powered things, and they're looking at nuclear batteries. It sounds silly, but when Diane and I, especially, would have conversations about our mutual patients, because her vision of that person's personhood and its role in medicine and harmonizing with the environment and the whole gestalt is very different than my slice and dice Western medicine. I would ask her questions about mm-hmm. her understanding of what's going on with that person. In the beginning, I didn't understand the words, mm-hmm. I didn't. But she would say things and I would ask her how that applies. And she has a Western medicine background. She was a radiology technician for 25 years. So she knows the medicine from there. But she would give me, like, studying PCOS, like we have the word PCOS as if it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Chinese medicine may have 50 different names for diagnoses or differentiations mm-hmm. for that condition. But every one of those diagnoses have an aspect that if you investigate it or listen to it or discuss it would give me insight of maybe where I need to look for this patient. Like their constitution. We don't say that, but then there was an amazing study on phenotype and PCOS and how that, it was actually out of China, but it was a Western medicine journal, but it was on phenotype. So how they look, you never think about that.
But we do.
Yeah, but you do. Exactly. You smell, you look, you know, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so if we're comfortable enough in our knowledge, and this is the thing, when you have a new graduate fellow who's a reproductive endocrinologist and you spring on them something like acupuncture or something like that and have not been exposed, they're not stable in their knowledge of the field, and that'll come 20 years later. It just does, with lots of experience. Those are not their best people to approach for combining things because they're just getting their feet. Whereas you get someone like me who's been at it a long time, and by the time Diane and I met, well, I was a scientist, so I think that's a little bit different. But I think it takes time to think and comfort in your knowledge to think outside the box, which, and by the way, applies to acupuncturists, because the biggest impediment Diane and Ray and the board had when they'd introduced this idea of the ABORM, it was the ugliest, screaming conference of acupuncturists you'd ever want to see, because they felt there was a betrayal, and how dare anyone tell me how to not use differentiation of syndromes, and who are you to say to me? We all have to stretch, and all of, I call it one medicine. As a matter of fact, that is a terminology I use. One medicine. And from a patient perspective, it's all one medicine, whether it's Ayurvedic, traditional Chinese medicine, Western medicine, ayahuasca. It could be anything.
I call it whole body medicine.
There you go.
But it's patient-centric, and what could we do if we all think outside the box to help that patient get to the goal that she's seeking? Because
you're seeing them from a prism. That prism, that experience, that everything that colors your way of looking at something is useful. It's a wavelength. You're looking at a wavelength of this person. And I'm looking at a different wavelength. I'm looking at infrared, you're looking at ultraviolet, or maybe visible spectrum. But that's still that person. So if you can get some trick, you said thermography. If you had thermal way of looking at them, if you could get that, you might see the nidus that's causing the problem, the thing that's, that's preventing the body's natural ability to heal, to reproduce, to be flourish, and that kind of thing. That to me is the advantage of thinking outside the box. Use every tool at your disposal and then invent some that aren't.
Yeah. I am teaching the patients to think outside the box.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, because they get trapped in their statistics, their lab results.
Yep.
They become a number, a patient ID number at their clinic. They feel like they're not being seen. They're just a case. So it's easy to think about that. And we know that thinking negatively and feeling like you don't matter, it really isn't fertile confidence. So if I can get them to think outside the box and to think like, okay, what if I do some mantras? What if I do some journaling? What if I spend less time on my phone, comparing to other people? What if I see, this month I had less cramping, or this month I had more egg white mucus, or this month I had more eggs when I did my protocol, to see that as the steps that are moving.
An N of one, and that one
the
is
N
you.
of one, I'm the patient, exactly.
Right. And you're a universe, and you're a universe,
Right, so to get them thinking outside the box.
That's important. I was thinking when you were saying about the number thing, it is going to be a number. And
you mean
and when you get care, in a Western model, it is going to be a number. It is going to be a structured, very rigorous, structured, limited, one's comfortable size fits all. And that's not a negative. It is how we've made so much progress, is by limiting the variables. Now, every person wants to be unique, and every person is. And a good doctor can both see both, but provide them within the framework of this is what we know works, and maybe once in a while, maybe 1 in 100, 1 in 200 will stray. And that's hard for, I think, our patients to understand, that it's not a personal affront. It's a practical way for us to standardize enough so we can see our patterns that allow us to treat amazingly. Getting a 42-year-old person pregnant, 25% of the time, that's just biologically unheard of, right? But it's because of the rigor and the conforming a patient to a model. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be aberrants.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and as acupuncturists on the team, we rely on you guys sticking to the protocols.
Yes, yes, because
couldn't
then
have
you
us.
can. That's right. So you're depending on us to be boringly similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the predictability of it.
Yeah.
When I made the seed program,
Yeah.
it was soon after
That's
we
brilliant.
started using the 5-day blastocyst.
Yeah.
You know,
Very
so
different
how many
world.
thousands of times had I watched these day 3 8-cell embryos go in? So that's how I knew how to write the seed program, because it was so predictable. Right?
Yes, we are very
and
predictable.
But now here we're kind of moving out. We've got the day 6 and 7 blastocysts.
Sure.
We have these other protocols where we're recruiting the follicles and stimulating them in the luteal phase.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
These new things are happening. So
Boost them. Yeah.
Right. So so many different things we could talk about, but yeah, I'm glad that we are all talking.
And your point was the thinking outside the box conversation, but you have to have a box to think out of.
Mm-hmm.
And we're probably that box.
Yeah, you guys created the box.
And then you guys are the ones thinking outside of it. But we with it, I think within and without, we look at. And I think it is by the way, that is another benefit I have had in working with acupuncturists for the last 20 years, is that by having you guys constantly have this conversation, thousands of hours of conversations and presentations and seminars and conversations like this, that creates the ability for us to think outside the box and go,
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or, back to the day 3.
Yeah.
8-cell embryos, not testing anything.
Right.
Like, I mean, we have had some fascinating conversations when you were teaching and I was in the classroom, but the freeze-all cycles, let's all do them. No, let's not do them.
That was an era where I 100% agreed with the science. But it turns out it doesn't apply to all. And that's where it's critical to be self-critical. You have to look at yourselves and see where the data takes you. Back to the conversation with Diane, show me the data. But even my own data, I challenge. Like a lot of the suppositions I had using day 3 fresh really may not apply to the day 5 frozens, blastocysts. And we didn't have PGT back then. We had FISH, which was a very crude way of looking at some genetic chromosome numbers. And now we have, PGTP, looking at, polymorphic diseases like autism and things like that. This is the information is exploding, and we should not be afraid of it. Like you said, that's not a fear thing. It could be overwhelming, but it's not a fear thing. Polygenic, that's the word, not polymorphic, polygenic.
Yeah, right. I want to talk about the fertility supplements because in class you said, hey guys, we're all about these supplements if it makes a difference, but the patients can get in trouble if they are ordering them online and they're just taking all the things.
Yes.
Like, would you please explain what you said in class?
One area that has been most confusing recently, you're seeing studies are now saying that those people who take a multivitamin or a B complex have a negative effect. So supplementation, there are studies showing supplementation having a negative effect on some outcome, whatever. And by the way, it's not just fertility; it's just across the board. It's not good for preventing heart disease or whatever. Supplements are not the natural products that we attribute to them. A supplement meets a chemical composition code that from the federal government in our country and others, that allows them to call it something like vitamin C, or they can call it vitamin B6. The problem is, functionally, they can actually be chemically similar, but not functionally the same. So your B complex vitamins, 100% job is to provide methyl groups for a whole bunch of neurologic and biologic systems. like folic acid, absolutely required. But no, it's not folic acid. It's methyl tetrahydrofolate, which is the natural product we make, where it's throwing and giving away all these beautiful methyl groups that allow cells to reproduce and nerves to function. But the ones you can buy in the store will actually not have the methyl groups, so they actually steal the methyl groups as they are consumed. So they're creating the opposite effect, even though they meet the definition of a folic acid chemically. So that struck me. It is so hard. It is about definitions. A vitamin is not a vitamin is not a vitamin. It's important, for example, that everyone look at their vitamin B, and if it's not a methylated cyanocobalamin, or if it's not, folate instead of folic acid, or if it's not B6, B12, and folic acid, right? If it's not methylated, you may actually be taking away the very thing that you're thinking you're supplementing. So, and even vitamin C, you can get the, half a penny vitamin C, in a bottle of 100 for $1, because it's ascorbic acid. It's a chemical composition thing. But really, vitamin C doesn't come about alone in the environment. It actually comes about with bioflavonoids and various bioproducts that allow it, when consumed, to provide the antioxidant effects. And so it is critical, the quality. Now, the quality of foods, the quality of our supplements from the standpoint of its functionality, like whole food supplements would be a much better option, because they are actually the bioproducts that have been created and formed, and so you can get access to.
Meaning food-based.
Yeah, food-based.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So that's where patients and doctors and scientists and the public can be so frustrated, because there's such controversy.
And it's so exploitive with the marketing, because these are emotionally charged women this is something they can do. It's outside of them. It doesn't involve journaling or crying.
Yeah.
It's buy something. It comes in a bottle. It arrives Amazon Prime the next day. And then they feel like they can check that box.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I was thinking of Corinthian leather. The cars that are sold with Ricardo Montalban, Corinthian leather. There's no such thing as Corinthian leather. It's a made-up name. But faux leather, it looks and feels like it, but it isn't, and it won't wear.
Yeah.
The same amount of, so so for the patients, I absolutely recommend the acupuncturist as a source. That's why I utilize the acupuncturist, is for them to talk about health, wellness, foods, organic. I can't have those conversations because I just can't, but you can. But I do point to the acupuncturists that they need continuous training about the products that they sell, and they can get caught up in the profit margins of selling things too. They're not immune to marketing. They're just not. They get caught up in this. So it's critical that, like you said, the patients empower themselves to really think and read about it, and don't just take it blind. But you don't have to take as much. That's the other thing. It's your foods are 88% or maybe 90% and avoiding alcohol, tobacco, drugs that will take things away from your body as opposed to provide you anything. That the supplements are great insurance, little buffers against the vagaries of life and the heat and the cold of life and the stresses of life. But the foods and rest are the key.
Diet and quiet.
Diet and quiet. There you go. I like that.
Comes back to what they knew in the 1800s.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I won't go into my stories about nutrition, because when you go back 100 years, it's laid out. there, you just follow that.
You are preaching to the choir if you were to go there, but I do see patients with their bags of supplements, and
Yeah.
they are relieved to have me tell them, no, you don't really
Right.
need this,
Right.
and you can let these 3 go
Yeah.
too.
Yep. Yeah.
So, thanks for the explanation on
Sure.
that. Is there anything that you would like to say about my research with the seed program before we
Well,
wrap
I've been
up
trying
here?
to seed our conversation with the
Oh,
seed
okay.
program, meaning how the mindfulness component, the nutrition component, the looking at the whole sort of life cycle of the fertility process. You were showing me in one of your rooms.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I show patients, and I was looking at it. You did something that is rare in our field, is you really tried to quantify. You took a very rigorous approach, looking at the data, creating a question that you wanted to answer in a structured format. Never being through the program, so I don't have that personal, but I can understand where and the way I see it is you disconnect them from the cycle of destruction. There is a cycle of destruction when you get into fertility,
Mm-hmm.
and its outcomes are so low. And I'm sorry to say that, but they are. As humans, we're very poor reproducers. We're predators. We shouldn't reproduce very well, and we don't. We really don't. Plus, we allow the most fertile part of our life cycle to be in school and not reproduce. So we take the fertilest, best time and say, put that off till when it's really not supposed to work. And then, we do that. So what you're pulling back in, and the way the seed program as I see it is that there are places that you structure things so that you can break this cycle of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
or a lack of progress, maybe put it that way instead of destruction, lack of progress or lack of outcomes that are successful. So for me, that fascinates me, that you can do that, and you can get the hard part for me to understand is how you get people to be consistent. That's the hard part. That
they love it. And they use it as an app on their phone.
Okay.
It gives them something every single day. And I've interpreted or intuited what they're going to be thinking and feeling on a certain day of their cycle or in their IVF cycle, based on tens of thousands of conversations about the same thing, and seeing them in here. Oh, it's day 8. That's an emotionally downtrodden, tough day for them because everything looks like an uphill climb. They don't know if they have it in them to do another stem cycle or to try even naturally.
Yeah.
And then cycle day 19 to 21, they're like falling off the cliff into uncertainty based on
they've had fluctuating their transfer,
and fluctuating estrogen and progesterone.
Oh yeah,
they don't have the hormones balanced to feel solid. So knowing that, seeing that, talking about it as much as I have, I'm able to put this thing together. So I can even say, on this day you might be craving a quesadilla, and the patients repeatedly come to me and say, when I read this, I think like, where is she? How did she know that I would want these kinds of foods, or that I would be crying or extra bloated today or fighting with my husband? So when they see that, it normalizes it for them.
They're not the
broken
weird,
anymore.
Broken, unique person that they think they are. And it's like, oh, this may be just a function of my biology.
Yeah.
That's it. And your observations, I think, give them a level of support that their friends, their family, nobody
could
can
possibly know.
Yeah, no.
Or if their hubby notices, oh gosh, we're like at ovulation or whatever, her mood gets like this or whatever, those that are the closest to us, we just will not listen to them. But if somebody objectively says, at this time, you're not going to be feeling good because this happened the same time last month, then it's like, oh yeah. And then they get over it much faster.
Yes. Acknowledging your normal really fixes a lot of things. Especially in marriage.
Funny. You're right. It's so funny. So thank you for the validation there on it. Anything you would like to say to the listeners that you haven't already covered that
Sure.
you'd like to?
One of the questions you had, which we were going to discuss, my role is more of a teacher. So as a accessible physician, it's a little hard for me to be an accessible physician, like telling you you can make an appointment with me and then come see me and that kind of thing. I wish I could, but I travel to 3 different markets. You know, I'm in a week in Chicago, a week in New York, a week in DC, and plus I have another week. And plus I created this institute. What I can say though is that I am available through practitioners to help. In other words, acupuncture, especially ABORM, DAOM, that's the role that I have. So they can be assured. And I'm also available to, even if there's a fascinoma patient where everyone's really kind of not figuring it out. Again, I'm very interested in that kind of a relationship, and that would be helpful. The people at Kindbody, the doctors at Kindbody, they're compassionate, and I'm not being sexist. Women, because they're all women.
We're all nurturing types,
right? Yeah, but so as an organization, what's also unique about Kindbody is that they're all connected. This is the most interconnected group of clinics I've seen. I mean, many of the famous programs out there that have many clinics are not as integrated as they are. I mean, they really are, where there's meetings and meetings and communication at a level I've never seen in an organization. So that's a lens that gives you a sense of security, because that's 30 different REIs who can look at your picture.
Yeah, it's very futuristic.
Yes.
Which would have been something else that we could easily talk about.
Yes.
What do you think is coming next?
Oh, I think that's another hour.
Exactly. That's a part 2.
Yeah, because I do have a lot of ideas about where I see our medicine going and why it's okay. Why it's, again, thinking outside the box. Right?
Yeah. And again, by you saying these things in symposium, at first I'm like, the patients wanting themselves to count their antral follicles, no way is that going to work. And what does that do to these trained physicians that have been in practice for a couple of decades? And what if these patients are too nervous to do that, or they think they're going to mess it up? But all said, it normalizes it for me, and I'm one of the interfaces to the patients still.
Yeah.
So
and
we're normalizing it for them.
And we do take our own blood pressure. We do take our own temperature. We do those things. And whereas before that was unheard of, right? Because the machines can do it.
Well, some women will love it, but I do think that this
I agree.
patient population still has a lot of fear and doubt and worry that they have to get over first. And as they get over that, their success rate goes up. And as they get over those kinds of things, they'll be able to move faster on AI tracks.
Well, anyway, for me, this has been lovely. This has been great.
Informative, helpful.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to join you again if you'd like, and we can talk about the future of this.
All right, let's do it. But for today, Dr. Mag, thank you so much for your share and your time and your expertise and all of your decades of experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Danica.